Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome to a bonus. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, folks, they definitely matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump into tonight's bonus, shall we? Today's first encounter. My experience happened on a day I was traveling the interstate. It was 1988 and I was driving through Tennessee at the time, taking what I thought would be a shortcut through a rural area and possibly through a more scenic route through the state. Unfortunately, along the way, my rear left side tire blew. I was basically in the middle of nowhere. That was a time before cell phones, and it would have been impossible to call for help, not the way cell phones make it so easy now, but I was prepared. I knew how to change a tire myself. I had a spare, so I started working on it. After some time, I finished changing the tire. I was still on the ground, and I hadn't had a chance to put all of the tools away yet, when I heard a lot of strange and rapid noise on the road some way back on the part of the road I had just driven through, after the tire blew out and while I was still stopping the car. I turned my head just in time to see something large disappear into the trees off to the side of the road. It was completely unexpected to see something that large, and I wasn't sure what it was, because I mostly missed seeing it in time. With the way it had run so fast, if I didn't look in the direction of the noises when I did, I may have missed the whole thing. Even though it was already gone, I kept looking over in that direction, somewhat out of curiosity, but also out of the sense of caution, because it had also been dead silent at the time, and then something large suddenly made noises by running across the road like that. There was no one and nothing else around, so it was a little unsettling. I kept looking there just in case I did see anything else, but also to make sure I wasn't in any kind of danger. I didn't know what this was, but I started wondering why it would have been running so fast in the first place. Almost as soon as I started to wonder that, I froze immediately because I saw the reason for it. A huge black canine came running out of the woods. It was enormous for a dog. It was running in the same direction the earlier creature had run, as if it was hunting it or chasing after whatever the earlier was. Even on all fours, the size of this creature was rather considerable, given the distance I had seen it from. At first, it kept going without missing a step. It moved fast, but then it seemed to notice that I was there. And I saw it do something that I immediately grew concerned about. While it was running, it turned its head towards me and started staring right at me. After seeing me, it never turned its head away from me. It had almost reached the trees the earlier creature had run into, but it slowed down instead and came to a complete stop, all while still just staring at me. Then it turned its entire body around in my direction to face me. I was petrified to see it do this and did not move an inch. It stayed where it was staring at me, and I kept looking back at it, still not moving a muscle. It's like I was thinking it would leave me alone if I didn't move, even though on some level I was keenly aware of the fact that the whole reason it stopped running in the first place was because it noticed me there. That still didn't prevent me from hoping it would just go away and leave me alone. Unfortunately, that's not how things worked out. It waited a second or two and then started moving towards me. That made me panic. I stood up immediately as soon as I saw it do that. It stopped again. It continued to stare at me and waited a second or two more. And then it stood on its hind legs. That was absolutely horrifying to see because of how tall it was now. I was stunned, and I was feeling a whole new level of fear. I didn't have a chance to put away my tools, but I had already finished changing the tire before the creature came out of the woods. The car was right there. So I could have just moved back slowly to the driver's side, got in, and boom. The problem with that was that I had already been too scared to move slowly. After seeing it stand up, I was too afraid to move at all. The whole thing was completely unexpected, and the creature ahead of me had all of my attention. It was still standing on its hind legs, but then I saw it take another step toward me, and then another, and another. I cannot begin to express the full extent of fear I felt on seeing this thing charging at me, or the sadness I felt at that brief and sudden thought I had that I may just die right here. It had no intention of leaving me alone at all. It was coming at me. All its steps were large with the distance it had crossed with just one step, and with how fast it had moved. I thought it would reach me before I could get back into my car, but that was the only thing I could try doing if I wanted to survive. I didn't have any weapons or any way of defending myself against this thing. I had a passing thought where it occurred to me to try and grab one of the tools I had just used to change the tire, but I didn't think any of those tools would help me much or be of use at all against this creature. I also knew I wouldn't have time to put the tools away and had to abandon them right there on the side of the road while I scrambled to get behind the wheel of my car. It was the worst thing that has ever happened. The creature was closing the gap between itself and me very quickly. It moved so fast, and I ran rushing to get in my car. I opened the door and jumped in and started the car and drove off as fast as I could. I looked for the creature to see where it was and realized it was running beside my car, along the left rear side and almost in a blind spot. I was still accelerating and gaining speed, but it was able to run alongside my car. It was still running on two legs at that time, and it was towering over my car. It was extremely tall and looked very formidable. I thought it was an enormous dog earlier, but when it was that close, I could see that only its head and lower body made it look like a dog. It looked like its upper body was more like a human's, but very brawny and heavily muscled. Its upper body was also bigger than a human would be. Long arms. It ran near my window, but then it moved several feet away. That made it possible for me to see its face. If it was running right outside of my door, I would have had to have shifted in my seat and strained to look up at its face, but I was able to see its face because it moved away like that and looked at me while running. I looked up at its face, but I wish I had not done that because it was looking right at me, and I ended up looking right into this creature's eyes. All of its fangs and teeth were bared. Its face was furious, but the worst part was looking into those eyes. There was so much fury in them. It was impossibly horrifying to look into those eyes. I had the clear and unmistakable understanding that it had no intention whatsoever of letting me escape. If anything had happened differently earlier, not being able to change that tire in time, not getting into my car on time, not knowing how to change a tire in the first place, not even having a spare, or any such similar thing that would have caused a delay, or that would have caused me to be stuck back there on the road. Then it would have caught me and killed me already. That's what I saw, what I knew to be absolutely true when I stared into those eyes. It ran alongside my car the entire time I was accelerating. My only hope was to speed up enough. I crossed 40, then 50, then 60 miles per hour and kept going. But it showed no sign of slowing down. I kept accelerating the whole time and would look back and forth from the road to make sure that I had stayed on the road and also see if it was slowing down at all. But this creature was not slowing down. It kept running alongside my car, and almost every time I looked at it, I would either see it had already been looking at me, or it would turn and then look down at me with its fangs and teeth on display and fury in its eyes. Things continued this way, but then it unexpectedly turned and ran off into the trees on the side of the road, closer to where it was. I didn't know why, but I looked ahead of me again and saw that some vehicles were now visible and approaching from the distance on the opposite side of the road. I didn't know if it was related to other people being there and approaching, even if they were in their vehicles, or it was because the trees it had run off into were the last ones visible close to the road for a while. Since I first saw that creature, and up until that point it had run off, I'd been driving through an area with trees close on both sides of the road, but now I was about to drive into a part of road where the tree lines in both directions moved further out and away from the road. Regardless of what the actual reason was, that was the last time I saw the creature. It's been many years since then to reflect on what has happened that day. In the beginning, it wasn't possible to even think about it without becoming overwhelmed with terror at the mere memory of it. I needed a lot of time to come to terms with that experience. That still hasn't happened fully, but after enough time has passed, I did start finding it possible to think about what had happened to me in some depth and with some degree of control over the terror I would feel every time I thought about this thing. When it stood on its hind legs, back at the time, that creature was the scariest thing in the world, especially at the moment that I saw it taking steps towards me on its hind legs. If I had hesitated or delayed getting into my car, I think I wouldn't have had a chance getting away from it and getting back into my car in time. If I had fumbled the keys when I was inside, or if the car didn't start for any reason, then, considering how strong it looked, it could have probably torn the door right off the car and pulled me out. I thought a lot about it regarding why it would come up on two legs. It's true that it was originally running on four, but then it went on to stand on its hind legs and come after me. And it stayed on two the rest of the time it was chasing me. It seems that it could have just come after me on four legs instead of taking its time to stand up and then charging me on two. It was without a doubt a predator, and maybe it stood up to appear even more intimidating, especially after it saw me stand. When I was on the ground by my car and it was still on four legs, it looked like it would have been taller than me. My standing may have appeared to have changed that, and it may have thought I was showing hostility or challenging it. It then showed itself to be much taller than I in reality by standing up on its hind legs in that point. In fact, it looked like it would have been several feet taller than anyone I had ever met. I say this even taking into account the fact that things look smaller when further away, so it had to have been considerably tall to stand up as high as it did, even at such a distance that I had seen it from. I also think that the creature may have been familiar with people to some extent. They might have known exactly what kind of effect it would have had on a person when they saw it stand at first, before it proceeded to come after them on two. It was scary enough seeing such a huge dog, but it was horrifying to see it stand up and start charging me on its hind legs, with it being tall enough to tower over me, and with it looking like a monster from hell. It's also possible that it saw I was outside of my car, so it may have understood that it may have had to use its hands at some point if it had caught up to me while I was in my car, but before I was able to start driving away. That could be a likely reason, and that could also mean it's familiar with both people and with the way we get into our vehicles. Even ordinary animals can recognize as much, though, for the most part, ordinary animals are usually unable to easily do something as simple as open a car door to follow people in without the use of hands. I'm aware that some animals can be trained to open car doors, while other animals, including wild bear, can figure it out on their own how to open a car door. But it's still much easier to do with hands, right? In that case, standing up when it did might have been more efficient because, after all, it had a human-like upper body, including its arms and what appeared to be hands. And it could run very fast, whether on 4 or 2 legs, faster than any human could possibly run, for certain. But it would need its hands to open the door if it were able to get to me before I started to move away. If that really was the reason, then that also implies it's familiar enough with people to have predicted what I'd do. That to me could mean that it had gone after someone else before, someone who was in their vehicle. That's a horrible thing to consider. And it wouldn't surprise me if that had turned out to be the case, because I am entirely convinced that it had no intention of letting me leave that place alive. Now I'm able to discuss this with you at length. That's something I was only able to do now that all these years have passed since the event. For many years, it was impossible for me to even think about it. The whole ordeal effectively turned me into a nervous wreck for a long time. Nightmares of the creature continued to haunt me, although they've reduced both in intensity and frequency over the years. For the longest time, I avoided the rural back roads and countryside in general of any state that I was required to travel through. I also became deathly afraid of dogs, especially huge ones, or any kind that could even vaguely resemble or remind me of the general shape of that creature I had seen, or the way it looked when it was still running on all fours and then turned its head to look at me. I would be unable to watch scenes in movies or TV if any dogs or wolves were running, showing aggression or showing their fangs or teeth. Another effect was that getting my children to pet dogs was not something I ever found possible to do. These effects have lessened significantly since then, but even today I avoid dogs. I'll even keep a distance from people who are out walking their dogs. I'll try in general to avoid being physically close to a dog as much as possible, without explanation. I won't look into your eyes. I would not look into the eyes of any dog. I never had any idea that an enormous dog-like creature like that existed. The one I saw ended up making that become the most horrifying traumatic experience of my life. It was one thing to see it stand up and start charging at me, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was looking at its face and then looking into those eyes closer up and knowing how close I had come to being killed. When it looked into my eyes, I knew in that moment with absolute certainty that it had no intention whatsoever of letting me leave that place alive. Thanks for letting me share. All right, folks, I hope you all enjoyed this bonus as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. Your support is honestly what continues this channel to grow and go, and what makes it a place for people to want to share their experiences, theories, and ideas with zero ridicule, zero judgment, just simply treated with the same respect that we all deserve. That is appreciated, the community you have created in the comment section. Thank you. Please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real. They are out there and they are dangerous. Share this information with the people you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions. Never stop searching for answers. God bless.